Bruchim Abayim to the first in the new series, which will consist of shiurim lectures on the Yud Gimel Midos Sha'atira Nidreshes Bahem, which I suppose we can interpret or translate as the 13 hermeneutical principles of the exegesis, the rabbinical exegesis of Scripture. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on the Yud Gimel Midos as they appear in a very famous Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael, which appears at the very beginning of every edition of the Tanaic of the Midrashic Halacha on Leviticus of Vayikra, which is called Teras Kahanim. And I think it's pretty clear too from the text, which will go further, that this is not just a publisher's coincidence, but actually the Teras Kahanim, which is actually the probably that Midrashic Halacha which makes use of what you would call exegesis, in fact, traditionally began, as was put together by Rav, with the Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael Braisa is actually part and parcel of the Teras Kahanim, the Sifra, the Ve'rav, which is the Tanaic commentary on Sefer Vayikra. Now, there's a question that we have to actually raise is, in fact, why learn the Yud Gimel Midos? What is the purpose of Yud Gimel Midos? I mean, who cares about how Chazal dash in the Psukim? I mean, no one uses the Brais, the Sifra, as a source of the Halacha. And in fact, most of the droshes that appear in Teras Kahanim, or droshes of halachas which appear in Teras Kahanim, actually reappear in the Shas, in the Gemara. A person learns Sevachim, Menachos, Chisis, Tamura, Archim. Then what does a person have to go to Teras Kahanim? Sometimes you can compare it to what purpose is there to learn Teras Kahanim. So, prima facie, but Matri I would say there's really no purpose. Why learn it? But the fact is that we see that the Rishonim, quite a number of Rishonim, devoted considerable energies to the Perush of Teras Kahanim. And for example, if we think about how many Rishonim actually wrote Perushim in Teras Kahanim, so actually if I take the Teras Kahanim, which is published by the Machon Ofek, there, in fact, actually, he lists all the Rishonim which he is going to, which he published, and it comes out to be quite an impressive list. And I mean, there's the Raivid, there's the Ramah, there's Yuchsit Tanavabarayim, there's the Raivan, the Rosh, and there are, in fact, many other Rishonim that have been added to this volume and other volumes which we'll speak about. So in other words, there's quite a lot of Rishonim who wrote Perushim on the Teras Kahanim. And because of that, I mean, if the Teras Kahanim the Teras Kahanim is not any less irrelevant for us than it was for these Rishonim. So clearly, if the Rishonim understood this to be a limud, so therefore we have to consider this to be a limud too. Okay, but in fact, let's raise the question: why did the Rishonim write a Perush on Teras Kahanim? So I thought that I would focus on probably the primary Perush on the Teras Kahanim is that of the Raivid. Right, the Raivid is known, the Gadol HaMafarshim. We all know that the Raivid wrote Perushim on Yerushalmi, he wrote Perushim on Adius, he wrote Perushim on many things that no one learns anymore, and actually he probably wrote Perushim on a lot of other things too, except that probably they've been lost. But in any case, the Raivid, in his beginning, he writes a Hakdama, an introduction. Why is he writing a Perush on the Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael? And I thought I would read from this Hakdama, and based on this Hakdama, we could see what points there are in learning the Braisa of Gimel Midos, and we could use this sort of like as a guide to how to understand it. So the Raivid says, "B'pnei ki hasefer zeh v'usefer Vayikra moli mitzvos v'chukim." Since Vayikra is filled with mitzvos and chukim, right? V'amidrash shador shebo nimshach shom alav kama kalm v'chaborin, kama klos u'protos, kama gzeros shavos. And since the midrashim, the exegesis, and Teras Kahanim involves kal v'chomes, so kal v'chomes, klal u'prat, gzeros shavos, all which are midas which are included in the Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael. By the way, aside, most of the drashos of Teras Kahanim are not included in the Gimel Midos, which is a subject we will discuss. How come the Yud is so important, when in fact actually we see Chazal using literally hundreds of other midas. In fact, actually, if you learn the Malbim's Hakdama to Vayikra and Yos HaShachar, there he comes out with, I think, 613 midas. So we have an incredible expansion in history. We'll see from 713 to 32 to 613. But in any case, therefore they established this mafteach, this reference, this basis. Basically, this is the yisod of all the mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs being the Torah Sheb'al as it says the Torah Sheb'al. Okay, now we know that. So the Ravid is saying, the Ravid basically says, why did the Bais Rabbi Yishmael begin the Teres Kanan? The answer is, since Teres Kanan makes use of midas, so the Bais delineates the midas. Okay, now comes the Ravid and gets to what we call the important tones. Says the Ravid, v'chulu min HaKabbalah. Most of the drashas are min HaKabbalah. Let's see, we know through tradition. Chutz min ha'ma'at v'henashim b'furashis b'Torah. Because he's not using Kabbalah, to wield an axe here. He's saying is, most of them are min HaKabbalah, means most of the drashas are part of Torah Sheb'al Peh, except for several of them which are explicit in the Torah. Kamosha anu v'asidim lefarish. Be'ezras ha'bayla. In other words, basically, the drashas really are min HaKabbalah, which is the Torah Sheb'al Peh. Kabbalah aim lekulam. Now he's using Kabbalah in a little different sense. The Kabbalah is, in fact, Beseira tradition, which is aim lekulam. It's the beginning. It's the basis of everything. V'shoyish ve'ikal l'chol mitzvahs. Hakela deneno. In other words, the shayrish of all the mitzvahs is Kabbalah, tradition. V'ilmali HaKabbalah, and were it not for Kabbalah, for tradition, me'ein line l'tziraf hamilas be'erushim minayin haral. Right. In other words, how would we know how to, how to learn anything in the Torah? How would we know the shayrish stuff at all? Right? How do we even know that Bereshis is Belokim, which is the beginning of the Torah? How do we know Kosh Baruch is Shem L'Bayra? Right? Now you might say, well, that's Pashut. Right? But the fact is, it's not so Pashut. Because actually, if you are familiar with older exegeses of the text, which actually date before some of these Tanoim who are actually being quoted, especially the wisdom literature and some of the literature, the Apocrypha, etc., etc. A lot of these, of these interpretations of the text understand Bereis Balokim means wisdom created God. That's wisdom literature. In other words, I don't want to. I can refer you, privately to the relevant textbooks. But the fact is that even something like Bereis Balokim, right, is it's not so poshut that the Kosh Baruch Hu created the world. Maybe Bereishis created Elokim. Now, if you say, well, that's a joke, who would think like that? I just have to refer you to the Gemara of Testament Aleph and Megillah, and there Talmi Amelech put together Shivim's Canaan, and they changed the Torah, and they all changed the Torah including the other changes instead of Rai Bereis Balokim, they were Elokim Bar Bereishis. Meaning that what? The Havamina, right, was that what? Bereishis created Elokim. Elokim did the great Bereishis. That's what the Ravid is saying. But, I don't know if this was intention, but probably if it's a Gemara to someone else, Megillah, I'm sure you hadn't this in mind. So what the Ravid is saying is that even a pasuk as simple as the first pasuk of the Torah, which speaks about the creation of God, right? Without a Kabbalah, without a Beseira, we would think that the Bereishis God created Elokim, Elokeinu. So for this, we need a certain Kabbalah. We need a tradition. It can't be proven, obviously, because they changed the text. Okay? Elokim hu Shem L'Bayra. Elokim is a Shem L'Bayra. So therefore, the Ravid is saying that even simple things, which are in the Chumash, without our tradition, there are myriad ways of interpreting it, some of which I would say are antithetical to the way we think and what we believe. ואפילו השיחה שאנו מדברים בו מבקשים בפירות כל צרכינו מן הבוירה, אם לא מן הקבלה בהם, היו שואלים, ועל כן אנחנו צריכים לעם מאוד לסמך על דבר ראשון החמר חדביינים, שקיבלו מהוויסם בכל דיתוק המצווס ומדרשה. In other words, even the tefillahs, now what does the Ravid says, even the tefillahs that we ask from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to rely upon the Rishonim, HaChachamim, HaKadmainim, shekiblu ma'avoisam. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the Ravid means by this. The Gemara does say, for example, in Megillah, in Megillah, then and Brachos, and in fact, actually, the Anshe Knesset Gedola, among whom were several Nevi'im, composed the liturgy of the Shemona Esrei. The fact is that the Rambam Nevuchim says the Rambam Nevuchim says actually the reason that we could even use the tefillos, refer to Kodesh Baruch Hu by name, is because the tefillos were composed by Nevi'im al Pi Nevuah. So, in other words, according to the Rambam, and the Ravid seemed to side the Rambam on some of these philosophical issues, as we know from Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Gimel. So, in other words, according to the Rambam, for sure, in other words, unless the tefillos are a Kabbalah, which is the Vul, which, as we'll see, is more or less the same thing, then the fact is, we wouldn't even know how to address a Kodesh Baruch Hu. We would just be, guilty of some type of anthropomorphism, a paganism. So, that's what he says. Okay, so first of all, so what does the Ravid say? The Ravid says we need Kabbalah. Without Kabbalah, we have no way of really understanding what's being written. So Kabbalah is very, very important. Okay, given that which is said, he goes on and speaks about his own Perush, his own commentary. He says, in other words, "V'nachnu tzrichim lahashlim aleh kol everenu, k'dei lefarish leitzia divrei Rabbi Yisrael li'yisam nidroshim l'chol shoyer v'nimtzoyim l'chol doresh. L'man tiyeh te'olasam shleima, right? Hayinu ma'arichim b'dvar ma'ele lishpoa divrei haminim hamamanim l'shmoya u'la'avim k'divrei Rabbi Yisrael, ach remez ramazu l'maminim pesach peschenu l'nevuah techazkenu yedayim belokim." Now, the Ravid says over here two interesting things. Number one, he says that really, it's too difficult to really explain. He says, Hamalach ha'uchel l'faneinu, and miut tzachleinu. So what do we do? I mean, it's vast, it's huge. How can we even possibly try to understand these things? But he doesn't say that we sacrifice our intellect. He says we have to do it. Now, why do we have to do it? Now, the Ravid actually lists two reasons. One reason is, L'farish la'tzia divrei Rabbi Yisrael li'yisam nidroshim l'chol shoyer. In other words, first of all, we have to make this understandable. Now, it's important, this is a part of Chazal, and because it's a part of Chazal, then it's very important that people understand it. So the Ravid says it has to be, in other words, nidroshim l'chol shoyer v'nitzoy l'chol doresh. It has to be user-friendly. It's very important to make things intelligible. In other words, making the Drosh HaKol intelligible, according to the Ravid, I guess is a part of Libat HaTorah. And then the Ravid adds, but really, that would be very, very difficult to do. In fact, actually, maybe that's even too difficult for us. But the Ravid says lulei, right? Now, he says, really, we'd have to actually, maybe we should just, make this 100, 200-year project and should run my papers right now. But the Ravid says, there's a problem. What about the minim? Says the Rabbim, the minim, right? Hamamanim l'shmoy l'havin divrei Rabbi Yisrael. I assume that the Ravid, at the time he's speaking about, is referring to the Karoim, the Karaites, who, in fact, refused to believe in the authority of Chazal to interpret Pesukim, and they offer their own interpretations. So the Ravid says, because of this, we actually have to, we have to enjoin them, and we have to somehow write a Perush which makes these principles, as I would say, more solidly based, more muchach, as you would use in a Talmudic Lashon. Now, so the Ravid says two things. Number one is, we have to make this intelligible, people understand it. Number two, we have to make it in such a way that the minim, the people who oppose, who don't believe in the oral law and tradition, right, that their arguments should not go unanswered. And he says, I'm not sure exactly what allusion he's leading to, but somehow we'll try to understand this a little bit later, that in a certain sense, what he says, meaning is that in confronting the minim, we're going to, of course, have to make things a little bit more rational, and somehow the nevainim, the people who believe, are going to have to use this as a way of, I guess, strengthening their understanding of Chazal. Yeah.
The Rav is trying to kirv on the Karaim, or he's trying to know Dala Malahashi Lapikoros?
I think it's Dala Malahashi Lapikoros. In other words, and it's interesting, the Gemara, the Lush of the Gemara on Pesachim Beis Sanhedrin is Havishakel Mol Torah. I'm always fond of saying that when Chazal say two things. You should, apply yourself diligently, which means is that part and possible. So most people learn. You have to learn very well to know what to answer the apikairos. Doesn't mean you left the apikairos. That's what people think today, but that's the pshat of the Gemara. But what it means, shakal Torah, that somehow answering the apikairos is part of the depth of Torah. That's what I want to claim. In other words, have a shakal Torah, and how do you do it? In other words, part of limud Torah involves a breakdown of the material to the extent that it would somehow give the apikairos, give the yachol something to argue, and then somehow we have to use that in order to make the Torah much more intelligible. So in other words, the fact is that we're dealing with what?
It's not like it's a titzah, learning Torah, vidah, and then you'll know.
I don't think so. It could possibly be, but what does one thing have to do with another? If you answer the apikairos is so easy, why be shuckling Mol Torah? Why should Chazal put them together? I would think just the opposite, because the fact is that when a person actually, what is a kasha? Every kasha, I think the Arizal says something, the kashas come from the klipas. Every kasha is a suspension of belief, when you think about it. In other words, being meishiv to the apikairos is part of the shkeda of Torah. The two are inseparable, that's why I understand it. It's very, very interesting. The Gemara says, I don't want to go into drushes and tangents, but the Gemara uses an example. I think a min comes to Rabbi Yochanan. And since it was last week's parasha, and the Gemara in Gittin says that the 3 first days of the Shavuot are actually part of the last Shabbos, so it's not shy to speak about last week's parasha. So it's interesting that there the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that the min comes to Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, "This is not something that can say." So Chosh Baruch Hu must have had a shutaf. So Rabbi Yochanan answers him, and says that no, that in fact actually Chosh Baruch Hu was b'siyais b'maya shel mata. When the gadol should misyayitz to take advice from those who are lower. So most people learn the Gemara like Musa, like shut up. The Yikra is supposed to learn Musa. I think that's the Brisker there. But the fact is, I'll tell you what the pshat in the Gemara is. Once a Kadosh Baruch Hu entertains the creation of man, then there actually has to be a God-man side dimension to him. In other words, Kadosh Baruch Hu of himself, Kadosh Baruch Hu as he relates to the Bria. That's only through man. Man is conscious of God. So once a Kadosh Baruch Hu, in other words, we cannot understand God and of himself. Once a Kadosh Baruch Hu entertains a notion of creating man, immediately, not in the speed of light, in the quantum mechanical sense, immediately, there has to be what? There has to be a man-God dimension. So that's the pshat. He's Messiah for Baruch Shamata. Kadosh Baruch Hu is in need of making himself intelligible to a human being. That's the definition of man. That's the pshat of Rabbi Yochanan.
And that was two aspects to God?
Yeah. That's an aspect of that's the pshat of Rabbi Yochanan. There's a Musar approach, obviously, but that's really what he wanted to say. Okay, in any case, so let's begin. Now, the Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael, is a long Braisa. Rabbi Yishmael, but what's interesting is that there's another listing of Midos. Towards the end of I guess, Halacha Zayin, the Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael brings from Hillel HaZaken. Hillel HaZaken, Darash, Sheva Midas Bnei Beseira. He says Hillel HaZaken was Darash 7 Midas in front of Bnei Beseira. Kal v'choymek, Zera Shava, Binyan Av, etc. 7 Midas. Now, it's interesting. Why are Chazal telling me this? Now, by the way, this is not a forgery, because it appears also at the end of Perek Zayin, Tosefta in Sanhedrin, and other places too. Why are Chazal telling me here that Hillel was Darash 7 Midas? Now, there's two ways of understanding, prima facie, before we go to the Rishonim. And of course, I want to, preface by saying that, of course, everything we're going to do is going to be Al-Pi, Divi, Rabbi Yisrael, Rishonim, and we're going to look at the Gemara too. We're not going to just look at the Midas, just the prices of themselves. Yeah.
These 7 are 7 of the 13, or they're different?
The 7 of the 13. 7 of the 13, yeah. Now, the fact is, there's two ways of understanding it. Either the Bryce is telling me, Derech Hagav, Hillel, on a certain day, well, that day, it's clear for the Tosefta is Tosefta is referring to the day that he came to Bnei Beseira, to Yerushalayim. We'll speak about it. Gemara Sam Vav Ben Aleph and Pesachim. That day he happened to have dashed in 7 meters. Maybe, like he said, a world record. How many meters can you dash in one day? But there's another way of understanding it. Another way of understanding it is that could possibly be that Hillel was the first person to give a number to the meters, 7 meters. In other words, the canon begins with Hillel with 7 meters. Comes Rabbi Yishmael and adds another 6 meters, 13 meters, although we'll see exactly how to count in the meters. And then comes that Rabbi Yossi Ha-Gelili, who actually gives 32 meters. Now, there are 2 ways of understanding this. Now, it turns out there's actually a Machlokes Rishonim. Okay? Machlokes Rishonim. I'm reading from the notes here in the Ben Shoshana, or Ben Shoshana's B'chon Opex here. It brings Machlokes Rishonim. I checked the Rishonim, it's true. But anyway, how do we explain the fact that Hillel was done 7 meters? Now, it is true. Now, it's clear that Rabbi Yossi Ha-Gelili is dashed 32 meters. So there's no way of understanding it, like the Shloh learns, that somehow the meters of Rabbi Yishmael include the 32 meters of Yossi Ha-Gelili. Meaning that what? Meaning is that certainly we can understand it historically. In other words, just like the Malbim has 613, Rabbi Yossi has 32, he has 13. What about Hillel's 7 meters? Because it doesn't say Hillel was Deirish 7 meters. It says he was Deirish in front of Bnei Beseira, referring to a specific historical event. That historical event, therefore, we can understand in 2 ways. Either coincidentally that day he was Deirish 7 meters, or that those are the meters that Hillel came up with. So it says over here, the Sefer Krisis, which is Shem Mikinon, you see what's Euler Thomas Kloder says, Elus 7 meters, these 7 meters, Shadar Hillel, Lo Mipnei Shlo Yad Deirish Sham meters. Chas v'shalom. Hillel was chalik on the other meters, right? And I'll show you Stuas B'Fiv. For somehow, I don't know, like, this was his specialty. Stuas B'Fiv. Or maybe he needed them because people didn't know these meters. Otherwise, the Sefer Krisis learns coincidence. But it's not coming to tell me that we have an evolution of the meters from 7 to 13 to 32. Okay? However, the Goin, and he brings the meters Alan, and the Goin says that no. He says that the 7 meters of Hillel are kind of the 13 meters of Rabbi Yishmael, and says Kochas of a Gob is price the 11 meters. Meaning that the Goin learn this is like the Lamed based meters, Yossi Ha-Gelili, are an expansion of Rabbi Yishmael's 13 meters. So too, the 13 meters of Rabbi Yishmael are expansion of what? Of Hillel's 7 meters. Meaning that the guy is learning that we have here a historical development in quotation marks, namely, Hillel, right, had a canon of 7. Rabbi Yishmael, I guess, made it more elaborate, made it more detailed, and made it 13, and then, etc., etc. Now, first of all, I'm a Litvak, so certainly I'm naturally going to side with the Goyim. But secondly, my feeling is, and as you'll see in Mitzvah Hashem, the gut feeling is that this is the pshat of the Braisa. If the Braisa tell me coincidentally, what do I have to know it for? My understanding, my gut understanding of the Braisa is that Hillel's meters are a precursor to Rabbi Yishmael's meters. Okay, now, what's the problem? First of all, the problem is that we're going to see in Mitzvah Hashem that if you look at the midas that Hillel was doing in front of Bnei Beseira, not according to the Bavli, but according to the accepted Yerushalmi, he used midas that don't appear here. That's what we're going to address. And Chas v'Shalom, we can't say our Maseret contradicts itself. So we're going to try to understand what this means. This is going to lead us to what I think a very deeper understanding of what the midas are. Okay, first of all, the whole Maisa of Hillel and Bnei Beseira appears several places. It appears actually in Tosefta Pesachim, Perek Dalet. But it appears too in the Yerushalmi, being in Perek Vav Halacha Aleph, and in the Bavli. Now, what is that Maisa? Now, I want to emphasize again, why am I going so much into Hillel? From a careful reading of Hillel's Midos, we're actually going to get a very, very interesting insights in what are the Midos. What are the Midos? And what's the notion of Beseira? Okay, now, the Gemara tells us in Pesachim, Samach Vav Ben Aleph, Tana Rabbanan, we all know that there's a halacha stated in the Mishnah that if Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, so we're told that the Korban Pesach is Derech Shabbos. It means we bring the Korban Pesach and we slaughter the Korban Pesach, even if it falls out on Shabbos. The Gemara tells us Tana Rabbanan, Samach Vav Ben Aleph, halacha zunas alma Bnei Beseira. This halacha was hidden from Bnei Beseira. Was hidden. Okay? Pamachas, chalaba asali yes b'Shabbos. Now, what do you mean this alma? Can't be this alma, can't be forgotten. How can they forget something like this? But actually, let me get a little sukkah here. Sorry. Just so you don't learn incorrectly, the Gemara says in Sukkah, on Daf Chaf Ben Aleph, the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, "V'tchila nishtacha Torah b'Yisrael." In the beginning, Torah was forgotten from Israel. Forgotten. Ola Ezra Bavel v'Yasta. Ezra Bavel came from Bavel and was V'Yasta, established it. Chazov in the Shtacha was forgotten again. What does that mean? Ola Hillel Bnei Beseira. Now, when would this happen? Says Rashi, right? Says Rashi. Ola Hillel. Says Rashi. Yishtacha Tom Yisrael. Lo Yishtacha Chula. Come on, not that the whole Torah was forgotten. Chas v'shalom. Ela hilchos shchuchos, halachos shchuchos, Bnei Beseira. They forgot certain halachas from Bnei Beseira, should be out Israel. Like it says in Pesachim, Elo Devav Samach Vav Ben Aleph. So Rashi clearly in Sukkah learns this alma means nishtaka. They forgot. So it says Tana Rabbanan. Of course, what does forgot mean? We'll also speak about that because nishtaka appears in several cases. In Tamura, Daf Tazayin, and Ben Aleph, and Beis, the Gemara clearly speaks about the Shtaka during Avdol Shemesha. We'll get to all these things. The real saying is that this alma means the same thing as the Shtaka. How are we going to interpret the Shtaka? So what happens is, Bnei Beseira, Pabachas Chalabas Leiliyos B'Shabbos, Shachim Liyadu and Pesach Derech Shabbos. They know Pesach is Derech Shabbos in love. So it said, Klum Yesh Adam Shedei and Pesach Derech Shabbos in love. Does anyone know if you read the Korban Pesach? Amu Lahem. So they said to him, Adam Echad Yeshol Bavel. It's a person came from Bavel, Hillel Shemai, and he was Meshamesh to go to the Adosh, Rabbi Avtalia, and he knows. So then they came to him, and Hillel basically begins dashing the Midos. And the two Midos that appear in the Bavli is he first makes a Gzera Shava, Mayada Miyada, and then after that he makes a Kal V'Chomer. We're not going to go more in detail. Okay, obviously, Darshayne. What does it mean? How can they get a halacha? The Chavas Yair doesn't understand what's going on. Chavas Yair in Siman Kuf Tzadik Bey says, "Elu Shavali al Kahal Kaddish Bnei Beseira." So Chiyun, Ech Nishkach Dover Hanase Shishbi B'Ves B'Zman Kotzer. I mean, 600,000 people every several years. Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos. How can they forget something like that? Elizabeth Tzorchi doesn't give an answer. The Meiri, however, gives an answer. The Meiri in Pesachim, in the Beis HaBechira, gives an answer. Right? In this on Samach Vav. And the Meiri says, let's see now, 1 second. He says, Aru Kan of a Talvan Habara, it says here in the Yerushalmi, The reason it brings Yerushalmi, because it's going to actually refer to Yerushalmi. Al Zikvei Beseira shiur Nesiyim v'Yeduyim v'Minhagim b'chol ha'irah. They were obviously Yeduim. They knew all the Minhagim, every ha'irah. V'amu alayim, I'm quoting from Meiri now. Pam achas ne'ela mehem in Pesach derech Shabbos. So says the Meiri, Dova ze'iev shalaf harish kipshuta. You can't understand this literally. Sure, you can't have 7 years without Erev Pesach going on Shabbos. Ella, says the Meiri, Ella, hatam ne'ela mehem. They forgot the reason. V'haya shamisha, kanta b'kaf v'liyadu lahashiv, etc., etc. Go on. So in other words, the Meiri understands that they knew the halacha, but they didn't know the reason. They didn't know the reason. Which means that what did Hillel do? Hillel came and supplied the reason. Now, the fact is that we're going to see a little bit in the Gemara that besides being the Meiri's contention that they knew the halacha, didn't know the reason, there are a lot of rayas actually in the Gemara itself. One interesting rayas is the Tosefta. The Tosefta Pesachim seems to suggest that the debate took place after, not on Erev Pesach, but took place actually on Erev Pesach itself. In other words, after everybody brought the korban, they started arguing this Pesach Derech Shabbos. That's Mashal the Tosefta, which means it was a post-factum argument. Meaning, of course, as life imitates Torah, it was a post-factum chiddush. In other words, everybody knew the halacha. The question is, what's the reason for the halacha? Okay, now, the fact is that the Gemara tells us that Hillel darshan 2 midas. Okay? One of these midas, and this is the Sefta too. So, they asked Hillel, Minayin lacha, how do you know? So Hillel says, Omalai. He said to him, Nema mayada bePesach. Regarding Pesach, it says mayadai. As it says, V'yasu b'nei Yisrael Pesach b'mayadai. That's in Bamidbar, Perek Tes, Pasuk Beis. And it says mayadai with respect to the Tamid, the daily sacrifice. It says, Savas b'nei Yisrael, Yomata aleim eskobi lachli shayech yechoich lishmir l'akri loy b'mayadai. So it says mayadai there. So Mama Adamo b'tamid deichas HaShabbos, just like mayadai, and the common Tamid is deichas Shabbos. But Adamo b'Pesach deichas HaShabbos. That's the Gzeira Shava. V'oy kal v'chayma. He also made a kal v'chayma. Uma Tamid she'in onish koresh deichas Shabbos. Tamid where there isn't onish koresh, the person will be the Tamid, don't get koresh in deichas Shabbos. Pesach she'onish koresh and onish deichas Shabbos. So you go to kal v'chayma. Then the question they made the head of the best, etc., etc. Okay, so Hillel darshans 2 midas, which are actually the first 2 midas that appear here. Kal v'chayma v'gzeira shava. It's interesting that the Braisa lists kal v'chayma for gzeira shava, but in the Gemara, this is the gzeira shava for the kal v'chayma. However, in the Tosefta, there's a little bit different version, which is actually attested to by the Yerushalmi. I'm reading now from Tosefta Pesachim, Perek Dalet Halacha Yud Aleph. Pam achas kal Yud Dalet Yes b'Shabbos. Shalos Hillel Zokin Pesach Ma Shivches HaShabbos. They asked him, Amalem v'chi Pesach Echad, etc., etc. So he says, Amalem. Okay, let's go to the arguments of Tosefta now. 3 arguments. Tamid Korban Tzibah. A Tamid is a Korban Tzibah. Deichas HaShabbos, Deichas Shabbos. Pesach Korban Tzibah, Deichas Shabbos. So argument number was a simple, I would call it a hekesh. Pesach, right? I mean, a Tamid, so Shacha, is a Korban Tzibah, Deichas Shabbos. So Pesach Korban Tzibah, Deichas Shabbos. That's number 1. Dava Acher, number 2. By Tamid it says by Adai, by Pesach it says by Adai. V'oid, in addition, Kal v'chayma, just like Tamid, you're not chayim kotzach, Shabbos, or Shabbos. 3 midas. There's a hekesh, I would call it a hekesh, and then there's a, there's the gzeira shava, and then there's a kal v'chayma. And the question is, why did the Gemara not bring the hekesh? Not only why did the Gemara have to be in the Hekesh, why did the Gemara, why does the Brisa say Kal V'chomer Gzera Shava, not Hekesh? Okay? That's the question I want to ask. We can't say there wasn't a Beseira, Chas V'Shalom. Now, the Yerushalmi, I have in front of me the enlightened edition of the Yerushalmi, so no one can scream to me about the Gilsa until we change it. Okay? The Yerushalmi says, Kava Amanu Sheyesh B'Mchat Techeles, Hischil, says Yerushalmi, Hischil Deiresh Lahan, Hekesh, Kal V'chomer and Gzera Shava. It says explicitly, Hekesh, Kal V'chomer and Gzera Shava. Hekesh, I'm reading here, actually it's very nice, but the Yerushalmi has actually a traditional daf, which is Lamed Beis Amud Dalet, in the Yerushalmi. Hoil v'tavid korban tziba, v'pesach korban tziba, ma tavid korban tziba, derech Shabbos, v'pesach korban tziba, derech Shabbos. Now, Kal V'chomer, Marin tavid shen chayim al Yisyasu kedas, Karei derech Shabbos, and Gzera Shava. It says Tavid by Adai, Pesach by Adai, etc. So therefore the Yerushalmi calls this Hekesh. Now, you might really say that maybe what Hillel's being done is not a Hekesh. It's usually a Hekesh. It could possibly be what's called a Binyanav. And actually, so you could say, what you could say, is that actually the Brisa of Hillel says, Kal V'chomer Gzera Shava Binyanav. So maybe when it says Binyanav, it's referring to what the Yerushalmi calls a Hekesh. But I don't think, I will speak about this. There's a lot to say about this. There's a lot to say to the scholars about this. But in any case, I'm a simple Jew, right? The Yerushalmi says Hekesh. I want to say really that the Yerushalmi understood to be a Hekesh. But in any ways, the problem still remains. In other words, why the Yerushalmi clearly lists these 3 meters. So there's a Tosefta, right? The Bavli evidently skips over or omits the Hekesh, and we see also the Brisa of Rabbi Yishmael, Hillel, a limit doesn't have Hekesh, has been Yanav, and the question is, why is this true? Why is this true? Okay, fine. Before I answer this question, I want to raise another question, which is interesting. Okay? We answer one question with another question. The Chachamim argue on Hillel. The Chachamim argue on Hillel. The Gemara raises a question. The Gemara raises a question. The Gemara says, Amamau, I'm Samavavim and Alvim Pesachim. Nema b'yad b'Pesach, nema b'yad b'Tamid. Ma'al ha'oma b'Tamid derech Shabbos, nema b'Tamid derech Shabbos. Okay, in Talmud, how do we know? The Gemara brings up right now. So the Gemara says, Amamau v'y Kal V'chomer. We have the Gzera Shava, then we have a Kal V'chomer. Omar Tajel, his car, etc., etc. So the Gemara has a question, right? The question is that why do you need 2 midos? Okay. So he said, "V'chim ya'achad gam gzera shava kal v'chomer lamali." What is the Kal V'chomer? El Dideu Kamalo. He said to him, Bishlama, Gzera Shava lo Gamisa. You don't have a Beseira, you don't have a tradition of the Gzera Shava. So I understand. But you should learn logic. There's a Kal V'chomer. El Kal V'chomer Adam Dali Yatzmai. In other words, we have here this aside that the Gzera Shava requires a Kabbalah. Hashem calls a Kabbalah. But the Kal V'chomer, a person can be done Kabbalah Yatzmai. So we have here clearly in Pesachim. You can see the other meanings could be a Machlokes Rishonim. But we have here 2 completely extremes. A Gzera Shava, you need a Rebbe. You need a Beseira. Halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai. Right? In other words, right? Says Rashi, the Ein Adam Dag Gzera Shava Yatzmai, and came Lamdo Merabbai. only if he learns from his Rebbe. But Gezerah Shava, a person make up a Gezerah Shava. Now, what does this mean? A person, if there's a Beseira of a Gezerah Shava, how come they didn't have it? They didn't have a Beseira of a Gezerah Shava? There's a Beseira. What's Beseira of Gezerah Shava? It's very, very interesting. The Yerushalmi, I'll get to Yerushalmi maybe in detail another time. The Yerushalmi says there's a logic between a Kal V'chomer and a Gezerah Shava. What's the difference? Why Gezerah Shava do we say you need a Messiah and a Kal V'chomer now? There's an easy reason. And a Gezerah Shava can take any two words and make up a whole new Torah. In other words, since the Gezerah Shava, in other words, as soon as the Gezerah Shava doesn't operate rationally, I can't retort it. So I have to have a Messiah. Otherwise I can make up my own religion. A Kal V'chomer is open to attack. So therefore, you know what? It lives on reason. If there's a reason to shoot it down, you shoot it down. A Gezerah Shava you can't shoot it down, you need a Messiah. Okay, so largely speaking, this is, but the question I want to raise is that, what is this Messiah that I need? Now, even though Rashi says several times in Shas, you know, he said several times in Shas, he says that, goes back to Hillel and Bnei Beseira, but he says you need a kolot from your Rebbe. And the Gemara Pesachim is clear that Hillel has come off Rebbe from Shema v'Yaftalion. But what does it mean here? I have to learn a Gezerah Shava from my Rebbe. Okay. What I want to do is, I'm going to invoke a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, which I'm going to go into very, very much detail in next time, so don't start arguing. But based upon this Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, I'm going to explain to you what do I think is meant by having a Messiah and a Gezerah Shava. And based upon that, I'm going to explain the discrepancy between the Yerushalmi Tosefta and the Bavli. And Braisa. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis and Lamed Daman Aleph is concerned with learning from Psukim how many tekiyas and truas do we make on Rosh Hashanah. That's what the Gemara is concerned with. And first, the Gemara brings a hekesh. Think about what type of hekesh is. I'm going to go into it right now. But the Gemara calls it a hekesh. And after that, the Gemara brings a Gezerah Shava. So the Gemara always asks good questions. The Gemara asks a good question. Right? The Gemara says, Hi, Taina, mi ikolam nicely behekesh. First you learn the thing from the hekesh. And then you bring me a Gezerah Shava. The Gemara is asking, why do we first learn from hekesh and the Gezerah Shava? And we'll see actually, Mitzvah Shem next week, the Gezerah Shava is actually much more effective than the hekesh. Certainly according to the Ritva. According to Rashi it is, according to the Ritva it is. We'll speak about that too next week. So the Gemara says, Hachi Kama. Says the Gemara, Elav Gezerah Shava. If I didn't have the Gezerah Shava, Havi Ma'asina leBehekesh. I would have brought a hekesh. Hasha Da'asa Gezerah Shava. But now that I can learn from Gezerah Shava, Hekesh Hekesh L'Tzlicha. I don't need a hekesh. What's that? What's the Gemara saying? What's the Gemara saying? If I didn't have a Gezerah Shava, I would learn it with a hekesh. But now that I'm Gezerah Shava, I don't need a hekesh. What do you mean? I thought a Gezerah Shava you have from your Rebbe. What do you mean you don't have a Gezerah Shava? The Gemara is saying that. Okay. This is what I want to say. A Gezerah Shava ultimately is based on a hekesh. In other words, what Hillel knew from Shema v'Yaftalion was a hekesh. The Chiddush, and it could possibly be that Bnei Beseira also knew the hekesh. That's why they don't even relate to the hekesh. in the Yerushalmi. Don't bother with the Hekesh. The Chiddush of Hillel, what Hillel did was he introduced a Gzeira Shava. In other words, the new canon is the Gzeira Shava. The Gzeira Shava is based upon a Hekesh. What happens is the Hekesh, which was heretofore used, Hillel now is, what I would say, changing the Nusach, and it becomes a Gzeira Shava. Every Gzeira Shava is based on a Hekesh. That's why you have to have a Beseira. You just can't take two words. There's a rhyme and reason behind the Gzeira Shava. How do I know that? I know that from my Rebbes. But what my Rebbes called a Hekesh, which is a Svara, it comes from Beseira, because I will speak about Beseira, Svara. What my Rebbe calls a Hekesh, which is purely a logical equation, I'm calling a Gzeira Shava. Two words. Yeah.
There's no Masorah on which words of Gzeira Shava.
There's no, well, l'chayra, there's not, let's put it this way. Right, in other words, the derech of limud was not through the words. The derech of limud was through the hekesh of the two inyanim, namely the Tamid and the Pesach.
And both Hillel and Bnei Beseira knew the halacha and knew the hekesh and the machlokas.
Right.
Hillel's chiddush was to find a coat hanger in the Torah.
That's right, the Gzeira Shava. Now, you might say, so what's the mile of the Gzeira Shava? Okay, the Gzeira Shava is much more powerful. As we make sure we're going to learn next week in Rosh Hashanah based upon a Ritva. The Gzeira Shava is more powerful than the Hekesh. Because the Gzeira Shava, what it does is, it creates a new text. And now we can dash in the new text and come out with more halachas than we had previously to the creation of the text. So in other words, the midah of Gzeira Shava is a text. Now the text has come from tradition. It has to be Messiah. Hillel didn't make up the halacha that the Korban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos.
But the text is a chiddush.
But the text, the textualization of that Messiah, that becomes a new canon. And then when we take the new canon and we use it, because there's rules of using a canon, it becomes very powerful, and I can produce, in fact, other halachas, chidushi halachas, that I would not necessarily know had I just had the hekesh. Yeah.
Why did Bnei Beseira accept this or let Hillel make Hillel into nothing? Either he did something really quite trivial, or he did something completely heretical.
No. First of all, you can't say it's heretical because on this halacha, Hillel claims the Messiah.
It's going to lead to a new Torah.
Right. So now we're going to speak about the Mitzvah Hashem. We're going to speak about the Mitzvah Hashem. We're going to speak about the concept of Nishtacha. But there's no question. I think here what we have in the case of Hillel is that Hillel constructed a text called the Gzeira Shava, which basically maintains all the properties of Beseira. Beseira is contained with it. But somehow this text becomes, what I would say, more effective or more important at this stage in history, which we'll speak about in Yetz Hashem. More stage in history. In other words, basically, let's go back again. What was the kasha that I asked? The kasha I asked is, how come the Bavli lives out the Hekesh, and how come the Brais of Hillel lives out the Hekesh? The answer is very simple. The Hekesh is a precursor to the Gzeira Shava. The Hekesh is the old system. Now, I want to warn you, don't ask me kashas, because the Hekesh is going to come back to haunt us. In fact, actually, in several places in Shas, I think in Chav Ches and Klisas and then Aleph and Gittin, the Gemara actually has a machlokes, which should you use, a Hekesh or a Gzeira Shava? Like everything else in the Torah Shpial Peh, there's no loss of information. It's just reused in different contexts. But the point is, we're going to get to that mission. That's going to be actually one of the major themes of these shiurim is going to be that the relationship, the dialectic, between what we call svara and canon. That's going to be very, very important. But what I want to say is like this. What I'm claiming is the following thing. What I'm claiming is that the reason the Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael leaves out Hekesh, right? Dealing with Hillel, also Rabbi Yishmael too. And the Bavli leaves out Hekesh. Because Hekesh doesn't make it into the canon. Hekesh has a what you would call as a gilgul in Gzeira Shava. So the Yerushalmi tells, what the Yerushalmi is telling it, he first began with a Hekesh. But Bnei Beseira didn't answer. Why didn't they answer it? They also know the Hekesh. But then when he brings from the Kal V'chomer, right, then they accept it. Why? Because the Kal V'chomer includes the Hekesh, but the Kal V'chomer creates the new text, which is exactly what the Gzeira Shava. Right, the Gzeira Shava creates a new text, which exactly is what was needed at that time. Yeah.
So what was their problem? They had the Hekesh, they couldn't answer the question. So.
No, because it was clear. So it was clear at that time. I want to say, what's the difference between a Gzeira Shava and a Hekesh? Because a Hekesh is a svara. You can always say, I disagree with you on a Hekesh. Once I have a Gzeira Shava, I've frozen it. I made it into a new paradigm. I can't argue on your Gzeira Shava. It's words of the Torah. In other words, what I've done is I've taken the Torah Sheb'al Peh and put it back a little bit into the Torah Sheb'Chsav. Then it assumes a new mantle of authority.
And is the Hekesh specific, or is it just simply say that there's a comparison between these things, or they had specifically on this din they had the comparison?
No, a Hekesh is a general comparison, but they use this comparison actually to this din too.
But they knew the halacha.
They knew the halacha for sure, but they don't go through a Hekesh. They don't go through a Gzeira Shava. I think what I'm saying is very, very mistava, and that, in my opinion, in fact, actually explains the difference between the Yerushalmi Tosefta with the Bavli and the Brais of Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, one thing, like I said before, the heck is going to come back again. In Memalef with Beis and Gittin, for example, the Gemara says, "What's Adif? A Gzeira Shava or a Hekesh?" But let me give you just a very simple example. The Gemara and Chul and many Gemaras bring as an example of a Gzeira Shava, V'Shava Koyin Uvah Koyin. Two different words. So the Gemara says. So the Gemara tries to use another Gzeira Shava. Why is it two different words? Shava Koyin again. That's if you can't find them, you can't find them. Doesn't make any sense. So what? I can't find two words. So don't make the Gzeira Shava. The answer is no. I know Bismillah. The din. So I do the best. Shava Koyin Uvah Koyin. Because what I do my best means I already know the halacha. I know the halacha through Hekesh. That's what I want to say. Now, what I'm saying, of course, is arguing. I think it's arguing on the Shlah. I might be arguing at the Rash too, because the answer to the Shlah is the question. It may cause the Rash. How come Hekesh is not? How come Hekesh is not listed in the Midas? So he says maybe Hekesh is more like Torah Sheb'Chsav. But the fact is, I want to say, I don't know what that means. What Torah Sheb'Chsav? He might not mean what I'm saying. But it means what Torah Sheb'Chsav means. It's like before this new development Torah Sheb'Al Peh. That's what he means. I'm not sure what he means. But in any case, I'm saying a different logic for sure. The Shlah is in the Torah Sheb'Al Peh, and you give him Midas. I think he might be quoting what they showed him there. But in any case, maybe the Rashbi Kinnot says that like that. Sebaklisos, with all due respect. But I want to say that this is an answer to this. Now, the fact is that there's a lot what to say on this issue, because I've introduced actually a new concept, which is the emergence of a new canon, a new text, which contains within the tradition before, but is actually quite enough powerful to produce new halachas. It's a little bit like an intuition science, and once you create the equation, the law of the equation can work for you, and it assumes not only everything that you know about, but actually it's very good at probing new things too. And this is actually part and parcel of how the Torah Sheb'Al Peh works. But for sure, we see things very clear. There was a Messiah on this. Hillel didn't just make up a halacha. The Meiri is right. Now, the Meiri is right for other reasons too, which you can actually see in the text. But the Meiri is right. And Kusha G'dayla on the Chavos Yair. But the Meiri is correct. The Meiri is correct. For sure there's a Messiah on this. You see from the Yerushalmi, from this reading. But we see what changed. What changed was Hillel creates this new text, this new midah, Gzeira Shava. Okay? Okay, now, even though the R Rishayim will say Lachal B'Sinai, we'll see Mitzvah Shem next week too. The Rosh says sometimes Lachal B'Sinai just means it's obviously right, just as it was for Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rosh should be Mikvah, etc., etc. In any case, I'm going to conclude over here because there's a lot more work to do. Actually, I'm going to have to do a lot more explanation. Mitzvah Shem in next week's shiur. We're going to explain a little bit more deeply what this means. We'll go into the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, instead of Rishonim on it, and etc., etc. In any case, from a new undisclosed place in Yerushalayim, Kol Tuv, Hatzlacha until next week.